My name is Richard Dolan. I'm a researcher and writer on the topic of UFOs. I've written 3 books, 2 volumes of history entitled UFOs and the National Security State. There will be a 3rd volume of that coming in the next couple of years. And I've written a book not about the past, but really about the future, called AD, After Disclosure, The People's Guide to Life After Contact, which is something of a what-if scenario. What if UFO secrecy were to end? How would our world change? How would that affect all facets of our society? Politics, culture, economy, finance, religion, science, and so forth. In the early 1990s, I was working on a doctoral dissertation in U.S. Cold War strategy. My topic at that time was the presidency of Harry Truman and working on national security strategy circa 1950. Nothing at all to do with flying saucers. That's not something that one does in the university world. But I stumbled into a bookstore one day and saw a book dealing with UFO cover-up and conspiracy. It's quite intriguing to me. I recall flipping through the book, noticing many of the names that had come up in my own research independently, in such a way that it seemed perhaps that it was credible, that there might be something going on, that these generals and admirals and intelligence specialists did in fact have a strong interest in UFOs. And my question at that time wasn't, is this phenomenon real? My question was a little more basic. It was simply, is this part of our history? Were these people actually interested in UFOs as it appeared to be? And if they were, even if it was a mistaken belief, I wanted to know, why had I never read about this in any academic history book? For after all, how could that not be interesting, I thought. And so what I ended up doing was to start out with what I thought would be a personal research project, to find out for myself, what did I think about this topic? Was there anything to it? Well, I very quickly decided there was a lot to this topic, that there was a great deal of evidence that these believers had been putting forth that persuaded me that this was a valid topic. And from that point onward, as it were, I was sucked right in and I've never left the field. A couple of conclusions that I've come to. One, no matter who or what is the agency or intelligence ultimately behind this phenomenon, one thing is absolutely clear. There is technology traversing the skies and the oceans of this world that is not supposed to exist, but it does exist. And not only that, but this technology is frequently chased by military jets from around the world, certainly and particularly by the United States. We have confirmed reports through released U.S. government archival records of jet chases from the 1940s, the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and right on through every single decade to our own era. This is not something that one can debate, it's fact. These objects, according to all of the reports that we have available to us, have the ability to outperform our best fighter interceptors. So that's quite important, and it begs the question, A, who are the people or beings behind this technology? And the other equally important question is, what's the science that allows them to do what they do? One case that has intrigued me and many researchers for many years, it occurred back in 1976 in the nation of Iran. This is back in the days of the Shah, when Iran was a Western ally. And what happened, this is one example of many of dramatic chases. Citizens of that city in the evening sky looked up and they saw this very bright, unusual object. They called the local airport. Eventually the traffic controller looked out and saw the same thing that the citizens were reporting, and he called the Iranian Air Force, which scrambled or sent off 2 F-4 fighter interceptors in succession. And in both cases, the pilots of the F-4 saw the object, brilliant, intensely bright, tracked it on their airborne radar, which had a very large radar return. And in both cases, at a range of 25 nautical miles, about 40 kilometers, their electronic and key avionics instrumentation went offline. In one case, just before a pilot was about to fire a missile at this object. In another case, the object detached this smaller object from itself, which then pursued the F-4 interceptor. That pilot engaged in an emergency turn to get away from this object. The object turned inside his own arc, pretty nifty maneuver, and then rejoined the original craft for a perfect rejoin. And we know about this case because it is part of a 3-page, single-space, typewritten report by the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency. And, moreover, it was a report that landed on the desk of the United States President at the time, Gerald R. Ford. It was a report that ended on the desk of the director of the CIA, George Herbert Walker Bush, and it also ended up on the desk of the American National Security Advisor, Henry Kissinger. Not a bad distribution list, and in fact it went elsewhere as well. Fascinating case. And really, we only know about it, really, by accident. It was from the days when the United States had a Freedom of Information Act that was actually worth something. It's much, much weaker today. But in the late 70s, it was possible to get reports such as these out of the U.S. defense establishment. There's been a history of smaller nations from time to time making some big waves in the UFO field. Back in the 1980s, the tiny island nation of Grenada, which was under the leadership of Prime Minister Sir Edward Gary, made center stage, as it were. Gary was a strong believer in UFOs. He had seen them, he had been a witness, and decided, because Grenada had no real international political clout, that he was going to use the United Nations as his arena to bring this issue out to the public. And it was a very astute move, ultimately ended in failure. But Gary, for several years in the 1970s, really tried to bring the UFO issue to open discussion within the United Nations. He received a tremendous amount of pressure and antagonism from the US and UK authorities, at the very least, probably others as well. And my own opinion is that the coup against Gary, which took place in the early 1980s, would very likely have been, in the late 70s, excuse me, was very possibly related to his interest in this topic. The U.S. has a global reach, and I get a very distinct impression that smaller countries that try to get out in front of the U.S. on this issue, they'd better be very careful, because if U.S. intelligence learns about this, it could be a difficult situation. But nevertheless, I think smaller nations and just non-U.S. Political sources of power are a wild card in the UFO field. And it really could be that ultimately the secrecy on UFOs might end not from the U.S. It could end from another nation that just takes a chance and says, we know this is real. China's the great wild card today. Chinese military is now, I believe, the second best funded military in the world. China has its own regional ambitions, and perhaps they will get to the point where they truly have a global reach. I don't think they have it yet, but maybe they're moving in that direction. So, and the other thing about China, of course, is its relationship with the U.S. is complex. They're very closely related economically, but they're rivals. And so China really could go a different way. You know, there's a story that came to me from someone with a lot of experience in China. And he was there during the mid-1990s. Now, it's a different age for China, really, than today. But nevertheless, he was struck by the high quality of Chinese UFO research. Lots of PhDs, lots of genuine scientists seriously engaged in understanding this phenomenon. And he asked them, why, you know, you've got all of this great data, why don't you do anything with it publicly? And the answer that came to him, which shocked him, was, we're waiting for the United States to do something. Well, the way they have to go, of course, the reason that UFO openness is going to be necessary, people don't really fully grasp this, but it's not about recognizing that, you know, little people are here. And that's important, and yes, we want to know about this, but really what makes UFOs significant for our world and our infrastructure is energy. It's all about energy. Because whatever these things use to go from point A to point B, it's not petroleum. That's the fundamental thing. And so the reality of this is that we are in an age right now where petroleum is becoming a real problem for us. Getting it cheaply, and using it safely. How long do we really think, honestly, as a civilization, we can continue on this petroleum-dominated path? Not very long, I think. And so someone at some point is going to have to make the decision to have openness on this UFO topic, because, frankly, that's where the true answers are. The real problems that we have are going to be infrastructure problems, grand problems. This is where a lot of people don't really think through the problem of disclosure enough. They think in their own personal psychological reaction. They think, yeah, I'll be fine with it. I won't go crazy. I won't run around in circles pulling the hair out of my head. But the fact is, that's really not the most important element of disclosure. It has to do with challenges to our infrastructure. It has to do with challenges to the political authorities, which, after all, people are going to be very mad. They're going to say, you've been lying to us for 60, almost 70 years. How have you managed to do that? How have you managed the academic community? How have you managed the political community, the scientific community, media? All of these will come out, and what's going to be clear is that there has been a global, highly managed system in place to really to micromanage the distribution of our news. I think that's an excellent question, and I think there will be truth commissions, and I absolutely have decided, my own personal opinion, that things like political amnesties are going to have to be considered, because the truth is what we have is a black budget world that has ballooned out of all proportion to reality. There are so many of these people who have been implicated in the secrecy, I think. We're in an age now of WikiLeaks. We're in an age now of almost everyone in the world soon going to be walking around with high-def little camcorders attached to their phones. Do we really think that there are not going to be other breakthroughs as well, allowing us to probably capture data in such a way and communicate that data that's going to make the UFO topic very difficult to keep secret? And so when that disclosure moment happens, it will only be because it's forced. It will only be because the political powers are trying to maintain control over spin on this. But that's where the battle begins, not ends. Disclosure is not the end of anything. It's the beginning of everything. If there are entities from other dimensions of reality, whatever that means scientifically, we're going to have to find a way to understand that. I mean, the problem with our global culture right now is that we, generally speaking, despite all that one hears about higher consciousness and so on, I really think most people operate at a very low level of consciousness. They, what do? They have to work their jobs, they watch some television, catch a movie, raise their kids, have a beer at the end of the day, and they go to bed. They don't have time to save the world. They don't have time to figure all of this out. And so, and that's just how it is. And so, consciousness is to deal with the challenge posed by presumably ultra-intelligent, maybe ultra-dimensional entities, is going to mean we, humanity, are going to have to step our game up significantly. And really, I think the only thing that's going to do that is the shock of learning that they, whatever they are here. And I have a hope, and I have an optimism. Besides all the difficulties and all the times we've screwed up, I really think that the human species will have this ability to adapt. And I think that we will have the ability, ultimately, maybe after several generations, to meet this challenge and to become something greater than what we are today.